Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hey everyone, the topic for this week is AI noise, a cultural and technological phenomenon where the internet becomes increasingly saturated with AI-generated low-quality content, commonly called AI slop. This term encapsulates the widespread proliferation of shoddy, nonsensical, or generic media created by generative AI tools. This unchecked flood of AI-generated content is saturating news feeds, social media, and digital platforms, making truth increasingly difficult to discern. In today's episode, we'll explore how AI-generated misinformation threatens institutional trust and democracy. We'll examine the rise of synthetic media, from fake news articles to deepfake videos, and discuss how these can destabilize elections, amplify polarization, and manipulate financial markets. Could we be headed towards a tipping point in the digital landscape where human-created content may get overwhelmed by AI-generated material? It underscores fears that the internet is evolving into a chaotic space dominated by algorithm-driven outputs rather than meaningful human contributions. So, Patrick, are you ready for the sloppening?
Well, this has been that term has been coined by a number of individuals. The idea of AI slop, right? And with this buildup of slop, what's going to happen to us, right? What's going to happen to media? What's going to happen to the internet?
Things are going to get sloppy.
Yeah. So I want to kind of, let me set the picture for you. Okay. Let me kind of, set the stage, as they say. Okay. So consider the effect, right, of utilizing AI everywhere. So it's auto-generating noise in every crevice of news and data. It is dripping into the digital channels and the feeds all the time, right? So all the news syndicates are all spewing out AI-generated stories, and bots are generating news. AI images are being generated to grab the attention of the human reader, but it doesn't need to be true. It's all about clickbait, right? AI videos are being generated across social media. It's invading the movie industry, such a volume that what we once considered uncanny becomes sort of acceptable, almost right. We've got this feeling, but oh no, it's okay. It's just the AI, right? And it's spewing out all this noise, and then we think about AI performance systems just working in the background like crazy. They're clicking away, they're counting, and they're keeping tabs, and they're watching what all the people are doing, and they're sticking more data in there, and making and generating and performing all this generation of crap or slop data, and they're throwing it out there, and soon we all get buried, right? Everybody gets buried. We get buried in this noise, right? Buried in this slop. And the truth gets buried. You can't even find the truth anymore, right? It's unattainable. It's indecipherable. The truth is lost, right? Journalism is dead, right? The media marketing has gone insane. There's nothing that's out of bounds, right? We know all about that. One cannot believe what they see or what they hear, right? Humans are jaded in their reality. Nothing is surprising. Nothing can be considered truth, right? And critical thinking is just impossible. There's no longer any kind of anchoring reference points, except maybe if one goes out to the library and, blows the dust off some ancient, texts where print hasn't been infected.
Welcome, everyone, to the sloppening. I think we're already there, Patrick. I think it's interesting. I guess we're just on the precipice of, what is it? Maybe a tidal wave of this to come, right? But I mean, very much so. It's already proliferating, right? You go on any social platform, you start scrolling through, stories or videos on Instagram. You start going into YouTube Shorts or anywhere online. There's definitely like a proliferation of it. There's, I mean, there are people out there being creative and creating things that maybe resemble slop, but it's definitely, you can definitely get really sucked into it as well. I think is the big problem, right? And that's the way a lot of this stuff is generated. It doesn't have to be high quality or high production values, as it were, right? And then the algorithms on the social media are just engineered that if you linger on a video or multiple videos that are similar, it's just going to feed you like more and more of that, right?
Yeah.
And I've,
Yeah.
I've actually noticed that myself. Like, I don't spend a lot of time on social media, but sometimes if I just want to sit and just, we all need some mindless entertainment sometimes, right? We all have our guilty pleasures. It might be a TV show a reality TV show that we're embarrassed to watch, but it's sort of a guilty pleasure, right? And we kind of watch it and we get some kind of like thrill out of it or some kind of entertainment out of it, but we know deep down it's not something we should be watching. But
what is this? What is this deep guilt you have? Of what show? We have to dig into this a little more,
I
Jason.
think what's interesting is that when you start watching things, if you have an account like on Instagram or YouTube, when you start watching things, it starts feeding you more what it thinks you like, and then you start realizing what you like, and you're like, do I really like this, or is it like, in my case, it's literally car crashes, right? And it's actually, and then car crashes lead their way to road rage videos that people have taken of things happening in the streets. And then very quickly, my algorithm just turns into a steady stream of like car
Murder
crashes and
mayhem.
road rage incidents. And then because road rage incidents are oftentimes people getting out of their cars and fighting, now the algorithm thinks I like watching people fight. So now it's not just road rage. Now it's just random people fighting in the street or in stores, right? And then it just keeps spiraling out from there because there's the next thing that's related to it, right?
Yeah.
And so, I mean, this is the thing that I have discovered that's been really fascinating. It's like I'm looking at it and I'm going, am I really enjoying this, or is it just that it's this sensationalistic thing and I'm getting sucked into it and it says, oh, you like this, we'll give you more, and then on and on it goes? Because I don't think under normal circumstances I would sit around watching like car crash videos or road rage videos, but sometimes that's where I find myself, and even though I know it, I keep watching it, right? So it's like I'm already caught in the sloppening, Patrick.
Yeah.
I'm already up to my ears in slop.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, there's lots of people suffering from that. Whether that would be the Trump videos or the, car crashes or what have you. So
It's the same thing, isn't it?
it's the same thing. That's the same thing. Yeah. Yeah. Use the word crash there. Now, so when you think about the algorithms, right, that are being used, maybe they're just too simple. Maybe they're really not complex enough to reflect the full broad sense of human interests, right? Like you're working on, some ideas about what you like, and you go onto YouTube or whatever, and you see a few videos, but it doesn't really have a true understanding of the full spectrum of what you're really interested in. And so the slop is all about how simplified it makes the world, and it focuses in on noise, right? And if you don't want to get out of that, if you're the deer in the headlights, right, and you want to just keep looking at this stuff because it's fascinating,
Yeah.
right? It's just fascinating, right? And then you get kind of stuck into this loop, right? And I hate loops. I hate being stuck in a loop. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very behavioral, right? Or it's based on your behavior, what you're doing on the platform, as opposed to like knowing you like as a person, for example,
Yeah.
right?
I think the idea here, though, is that the AI, left to its own devices, can generate just mad amounts of data, just checkable amounts of unqualified mistruths, right? Just slop, right? And that's the idea, right? We've got this capability of linking in, almost truths, right, of information, and then selling it, right? Selling it as a truth, right? So I went out and I asked AI, I said, hey, Perplexity, right? What happens if, AI is allowed to run unsupervised to create stories that aren't necessarily true and make things up and sell it as a truth and spew all this noise into major news feeds like it was authorized and confirmed, right? And it came back and said, well, the unchecked proliferation of AI-generated misinformation would trigger a multi-layered crisis, eroding public trust, destabilizing institutions, and overwhelming fact-checking systems. And so I said, okay, well, give me a little breakdown of this, right? So it would cause an erosion of institutional trust. Media credibility would collapse. AI-generated news would be indistinguishable from legitimate reporting, and it would just fly to all the platforms, right? Authoritative source paralysis is what we'd be suffering from, right? We'd lose trust in all scientific, medical, and government institutions, right? Because all this AI hallucinated content would spread across, all these different news sources and spread false claims and, provide data that is not necessarily accurate.
So wait, we're saying that this is what could happen? Because this sounds like we're already halfway there.
That's right. It's saying this is what would happen, right? So we'd have an amplification of harmful content, right? Which would cause, well, let's put it this way, the very roots of democracy, right? Which is based on shared truths and understandings, is at risk. Geez, I wonder what's really happening out there right now, right? We'd have social fragmentation, right? People would personalize to align themselves to certain types of disinformation, right? And they target other demographics with conflicting narratives, right? It would cause polarization, right? Now, that means, of course, discourse, right? Public discourse. And then you'd have economic and security impact. So financial markets could be manipulated by, fake earnings reports and forged merger announcements and synthetic analyst predictions. I mean, all that noise could be generated very easily, right? And of course, we'd have, the ability of generating crisis, right? Because that's what we wanted to hear. So we're going to get what we want, right? There's going to be all these fake crises created. And, we have these emergencies, these natural disasters. And we'd be thinking, oh my goodness. Meanwhile, it never really happened. It never happened, right? And of course, in the end, these systems that are running in the background, just, charging around for clickbait, just feeding the system madly so they can get you to buy into the story, right? And then to the next story and the next story, right? This noise would just proliferate. It would just expand exponentially. So what Perplexity came up with was an initial surge, 2025 to 2027. And basically 60% of social media would be generating AI noise, AI slop, right? And then 2028 to 2030, there'd be a systematic collapse, right? Where there'd be the majority of people would distrust all digital media, right? And there'd be a resurgence of standard journalism, right? And of course, there would be, in 2031 plus, there would be some forms of controls, regulations, and authentication standards implemented, because in the end, this could actually determine or cause economic loss, right? So this could cause, and Perplexity's phrasing, a post-truth dark age. That's what it's saying, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely heading in that direction, right? As you know, even in terms of like the AI news articles, you know, like are they written for us or are they written for an audience of AI bots, right?
Yeah.
And
That's
this
right.
is where you've actually seen instances of people asking, you know, say ChatGPT a question and it giving an answer that was based on it sourcing it from a fake AI written article. There was something involving, I forget, like an actress, where she gave an interview where she was, I think, describing something for one of her movies or whatever it was. She wasn't talking about herself, and somehow the AI had inferred that she was and turned it into truth. And then when somebody asked it, it was like, you know, describing that she had a drinking problem or whatever it was, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, this is the other challenge, right? It's like we can talk about all this AI slop, you know, infecting humanity, but once it masquerades as like a news article or what have you, then the large language models are going to be out there scraping the internet, and then you know you just end up in this like endless cycle of slop. If anybody's out there wants to play a drinking game, if you just listen to this podcast and then take a drink every time that one of us says slop during this episode, then yeah,
It's a great idea.
You'll be pretty drunk by the end of it, right?
Or derivatives of sloppening, right? Yeah. Yeah. So, let me hit you with some facts first. Right?
Yeah, let's go for it.
So, how big is this problem, right? 2025, Stanford did a study. They found that 38% of social media posts right now are AI generated versus 12% in 2023. 38% versus 12%, right? That's 11 times faster than human created material. This is on a upward spiral. This is like growing at an exponential rate, right? And, you know, the sophistication of these tools now is also growing, right? So, you know, tools like GPT-5 and Adobe's Video Phantasm, we can go down the list, right? They're all able to generate fake news articles and doctored images and fake news feeds, like videos. And they can do it we're talking seconds, right? We're talking, you know, we're not talking, it's going to take a half a day. This is seconds. So we're able to create all this noise, right? And so if you give that providence, if you give an AI providence to make decisions, right, without the fact checking, without the regulation, the governance, and it's going to just chug away and create all this noise. And it's going to just start feeding the systems, right? And pretty much we're going to see, you know, the idea of, you know, what they call virality, right? Where MIT quoted it, right? They basically they're really trying to examine what's going on from a point of view of truth versus untruth. And AI generated conspiracy theories, for instance, they're spreading 6 times faster than factual reporting, right? Because it's sensational. It's titillating. Don't you love that word, titillating? Yeah.
Well, I thought it was interesting in the guy who kind of came up with the term that we've been loving this week, right? The sloppening was Joe Burns. If you look him up on LinkedIn, he's got a post there, a visual book about the sloppening, right? And I thought what was interesting, the point that really stuck out to me was that he said, it's not a failure of artificial intelligence. It's the triumph of human stupidity. right?
That's
It
right.
exists because of us, and we are optimizing ourselves into oblivion, not by accident, but by design, right? And there's this whole industry built around getting people's attention and keeping that attention, right? And that's where you can monetize it and serve them up ads and serve them up more information and keep them stuck in the slop, right? And really, it's, his point is that we can't blame AI. We only have ourselves to blame for this, right? Because we're applying it to something that's just a very like low value, right? In fact, I
Yeah.
think he called it like completely pointless,
Yeah.
in a sense. So it's interesting because it's oftentimes we want to point to, the technology or the thing to be the problem, right? Oh, AI is the problem, right? Or the internet's the problem, or social media is the problem. But every generation has had something that it's pointing to that's the problem. But in essence, it's not, the thing is not the problem, the people is the problem, right? It's the behavior. I mean, maybe the technology or whatever it is influences it, but when I was younger, I grew up being a heavy metal fan. That was my music of choice when I was a kid, and it became vilified through the 80s. You had Tipper Gore, who was the wife of Al Gore, who almost became president at one point, had the PMRC, I think they were called, the Parents Music Resource Center, and they were the group that slapped all the labels on albums. Which, guess which albums had all the labels slapped on them, right? They were the heavy metal albums, and those were the albums that were held up in Congress when they were. But at the end of the day, and then the other thing that happened was there was at least a couple of, unfortunate incidents where kids had committed suicide and they happened to be listening to like Judas Priest or Iron Maiden or whatever heavy metal group, right? But the
But they
thing was,
weren't
is
they
that,
weren't listening to Bee Gees.
well, some of them might have been. But the point being is that, but there was also millions and millions of heavy metal fans around the world that were not killing themselves, that were not criminals, and they were not engaging in behaviors that they were trying to equate to heavy metal music. So in other words, they vilified heavy metal music. You even had, at one point, the video gaming industry was vilified, where there were
Yeah.
some violent incidents where the person was playing Call of Duty or whatever game, right? And so I guess, that rant is really along the lines of that, we oftentimes default to say, well, AI is the problem, but we created AI and we're applying it in different areas. So like, really, we're the problem. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And we're just been given some really interesting tools to create some chaos on this planet lately. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, if we think about it, one of the things, I asked Gemini to, I went through and asked all the different platforms. One of the things that Gemini came back and said, well, it's basically disinformation overload, right? Now, disinformation overload is present right now in social media without any AI. Wouldn't you say?
Oh yeah,
Like,
for sure.
it's
Yeah.
there's an incredible amount of disinformation right now. We'll call it bullshit. Yeah, that's what I'm going to call it. Or you can call it slop. But the idea is that this stuff is being generated based on, some, specific person's idea of how things work, and it's being promoted, right? And of course, it's sensational, and it's luring people into looking at that car accident of an idea, right? And people are just gobbling it up and starting to repeat it, and it self propagates, right? It's insane the amount of untruths we're dealing with here, because nobody wants to deal with the truth. It's boring, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So we got disinformation overload. We got the rise of conspiracy theories, right? And that's the other thing that really irritates me is if you have an idea and you think, okay, this is a theory, this is an idea, and some other people don't like it, they'll throw the word conspiracy in front of it, and instantly it's labeled, right? You're labeled. It's labeled. It's got this big line X across it, and it's no longer valid, right? And that's what you can do to, the fact that, somebody came up with the idea originally that the earth was actually a sphere, was round. And, the idea turned into reality, but it wasn't ever proven, right? It was never actually proven. There's a number of different, examinations of the horizon and the tilt of the earth and things like that, and looking at other bodies in space. And it was, no, we're not flat. But the idea still survived the flat earth. And guess what? We got flat earth thinkers today. It's like, what? Yeah, it's out there, right? So
Well, hang on a second. So you're saying that the earth is not flat.
mm-hmm.
That's your position. The position that you're taking is that the earth is not flat. I mean, Patrick, that's a conspiracy. That's a conspiracy theory right there, right?
That's what people did, right?
We all know the earth is flat. Come on. What are you talking about?
We all know that. Because from our perspective, right? That's how we see things, right? You don't have a wider perspective. And this is the problem with, narrow ideas. You have to be open-minded, right? You have to be able to accept other ideas and think, okay, there's plausibility here. There's reasonability here. There's some capability of this being correct, right? And that's opens your mind to thinking broader, right? Now, what we're talking about here in the sloppening, and basically the AI just keeps popping you full of your same ideas. Bang, 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 bang. Just gives you shotguns of it. And you're never ever being exposed to the alternatives, right? You're never getting exposed to the, we'll say the opposite of the paradigm, right? And how do you actually ever broaden your scope? How do you open your mind when all you get exposed to is the same old slop?
Well, I mean, that's the algorithm, right? It really just, it feeds you more and more of what you want. Like I talked about earlier, right? Oh, you like car crashes? You like, fights in the street, road rage? Let's just give you more and more of that, right? And then there never seems to be a way to like break yourself out of that algorithm.
Yeah.
That it's, and for anybody, I mean, we've talked about this in some other, podcasts, I'm sure, but if you're ever curious to understand exactly how these algorithms work and how quickly they can pick up on your behavior and kind of bend to whatever it is you're watching and feed you more and more of it, set up a new account, like create a new email address or whatever, and set up a new YouTube account or an Instagram account. Create a slop account, right? So like even as something simple as go to YouTube with that slop account and just start watching videos of cats. And don't watch anything but videos of cats for, whenever you go to YouTube or over the course of even just a day. You log in the next morning when you go to the YouTube homepage, the entire homepage will be cats, or at least most of it. It might show you a couple of other things related to cats, right? It might show you some other animals, but keep watching the videos of cats and keep watching them for another day. I bet you that I haven't actually tried this myself, but I've heard of some people like describe it. I bet you by the end of day 2, your entire YouTube recommendation algorithm will be all cats. 100%.
And I'd be sneezing. Right? I'd be sneezing.
Yeah. But it is engineered true. That way, right? And
it's not those algorithms are too simplified. Like I said, they're not broad enough to look at the full expanse of the individual user, right? And what that person knows and what that person should know, right? So, there's other animals, maybe you should be looking at bunnies, right? Cute little bunnies, and the idea here too is when you get in this focused thinking, right? You get into this, what, they call it a lemming thing. You walk off the cliff because that's the way it is, right? You're entracted, right? And you never open up, right? The other thing that it's really interesting here that you talked about is the emotional aspect, right? Of what you're viewing and what you're interested in, right? And when we think about, I really like to look at kind of little cats, right? Well, there's people out there that really like to believe that the end is coming, the end is nigh, right?
Yeah.
We're all going to die, right? So they'll be looking for the next market crash, right? They'll be looking for the next major catastrophe, the next major weather disaster, the coming volcanic explosion.
Well, whatever feeds that emotion, right?
So that's the other complicated side of these AI bots is they're looking at all these different, they got their little tendrils out and they're looking at all these different components, right? And the idea is that you can actually spread fear and panic,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you spread fear and panic and you take that and you combine that with investments into a stock market, what do you get?
Yeah, I mean, it's if you look at like even way back in the day, War of the Worlds, right? The famous radio broadcast that was meant to
Yeah,
sort of be like a play that some people took to be real and thought like the Earth was getting invaded and caused a bit of panic, if I'm not mistaken, like back in the day, right? Now we got that like multiplied by like 5 million, right? And I mean, I use the example of like watching cat videos, which is something that makes you happy, right? But we're increasingly getting drawn into sort of this idea of conflict, or especially in like the political realm, right? And oftentimes it's feeding you things that really rile you up. They want you to like not just watch more, but engage more and share more and comment on more, right? And
yeah,
so if you can engineer things in that sense that stir up a real emotion, like it's being happy is kind of like an easy emotion in a sense, right? Like it's also more or less positive. Like if you want to go create a YouTube account tomorrow and watch cats all day, I think you're probably going to be better off for it, right? But
yeah,
if your YouTube algorithm or Instagram algorithm not just feeds you like political content, but it's constant content that's not just reinforcing what you believe in, but reinforcing that the other side is evil or wrong
yeah,
or bad. And you just keep reinforcing that over and over again. And as we've seen in more recent times in politics, the approach is to just keep repeating a lie enough times so that people start believing it's real.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. So, Gemini came up and said, well, one of the examples of what will happen is you have a breakdown of shared reality. And what that means is it's a loss of common ground, right? The
Mm-hmm.
proliferation of AI generated misinformation could lead to a fragmentation of shared reality where individuals and groups live in separate information bubbles. We have that today. I think the idea here is that misinformation can and will fuel social division, right? So it can create false narratives and it can pit different groups against one another. Again, this is occurring now, right? There's no room for middle, right? There's no give right now. People are, if you look at what's going on in the social economic world, a lot of people out there are aligned right or left, right? There's no, and this is one of the things that has been, discussed many times. The achievement of civilization is about the ability to compromise and work together in a social
Yeah.
structure,
I
right?
mean, they're living in alternate realities in a sense, right? And you have this something called the Mandela effect, which they actually did a really interesting
Oh
episode of the
yeah,
X Files
that
on
was a good
that.
one. Yeah,
Whereas like the phenomenon where a large group of people collectively misremember facts, events, or details in a consistent manner, often leading to shared yet false memories. And I think we're entering that stage right now in a sense, right? Where you have, if we want to stay on the kind of political side of things, you have, one political party creating an entire narrative about, how the previous election went and how it was stolen and whatnot. And, you see interviews with people where they absolutely believe it, and they, in mass, right? So for that group of people, they look at that, that sloppening that happened during that time. And, they collectively believe a certain reality. And then other people look at it and go, well, we saw what happened. That wasn't what happened. But they were being fed the narrative so often and with such consistency that there's literally, it's like they're living in an alternate timeline in a sense, right? That they look back at something very different. And that's sort of where things lead to, right? Where you collectively mislead a population into thinking about things a little bit differently, right?
Well, and you can't blame people. I mean, they're lost, right? The truth and fiction are so difficult to decipher, right? People can't distinguish between what is real and what is fake, right? And there's little to no public trust, so people revert back to what they feel is the proper path. What they feel is what the truth is, and that may not be correct, because their exposure is very limited, right? And that being said, right, you get this division, this constant division. So this whole idea of generating noise, right, and hiding the truth, burying the truth, right, just reinforces all that. It just creates this situation of total confusion, and then steers people to, align with whatever they feel is 100% correct based on what they've been exposed to, which is not necessarily 100% correct, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, case in point, flat Earth, round Earth, right? Apollo missions or fake, right? Mandela died or he didn't, right? I remember I thought Mandela died.
Oh, really?
Yeah. My memory was, I'm sure I heard it. And it was like, okay, but he did die. Right? So
Well, I'm going to start the Square Earth Club, I think is what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a new conspiracy. It's not flat, it's not round, it's square. The Earth is square. There you go.
But if we start really thinking about this, you go back to the reality of people getting exposed to noise, to slop, right? The whole idea of they talked about the media being the message. The actual the message is not just what's being produced, but it's actually the structure, the foundation that's part of the message. Well,
Mm-hmm.
what we've got now is this social media crap out there without any self-checking, without any verification, and it's just running amok, right? You cannot trust it, right? You cannot make decisions using that information. All you can do is say, well, that's interesting. Should I believe it? Or should I try to verify that? Right? And if you take the latter role, then you're a smarter person. You are using, prudent, and critical thinking at your disposal. Now, the idea is, now can you go and find that information? And that is the trick.
Well, that's the challenge, right? How are you gonna wade through all that slop? You're up to your elbows in slop, and how are you gonna find your way through that and even find the truth? And if you look at, even think about, we always this is our favorite expression is when you back in our day. But if you think about the way we got our news, 30, 40 years ago, say for example, right? There was a handful of broadcast networks. There was, primarily like one newspaper in each city. And some could say that it was very controlled in a sense, right? That you had a certain number of corporations really controlling the message. And by all means, I mean, I'm sure there was times where that might have gotten manipulated to a sense, or that somebody was trying to control a narrative to the population, right? But that system was very resistant to noise because there was still some level of checks and balances in there, right? And then you had broadcasters that were beholden to sort of FCC standards, and you had, what was real journalism back there, right?
Yeah.
And then you would have enough of that, so if somebody really went off on a tangent, it wouldn't make sense, because for the most part, people were pretty beholden to the truth, but there was a standard because you had people that were dedicating their lives to being actual journalists and reporting the truth and going on the front lines of what was going on, right? And reporting with video. And that was long before, AI and CGI and all these things, right? But now you have this you have a million broadcast stations online. You have this proliferation of outlets, and whether it's an individual in Kentucky or a bot farm in Russia or whatever, you have millions and millions of social accounts pumping things into algorithms, right? So I guess what I'm saying is, you have this idea of slop, but now you have infinite channels to get that information to people. Now you're opening it up to AI, where people are just opening up ChatGPT or what have you and asking a question and getting an answer back, and maybe not even looking for the source. And you know what I mean? It's an increasingly noisy world in a lot of ways, and I think that it's much less resistant than the old way that we used to get our information and get our news and that type of thing. So,
well, that's one of the reasons why I actually I did the research in this, and I asked all the AI agents, right? Because I thought it was very ironic, right? To follow that path, right? There's a huge sense of irony here about asking them about where this will go, right? And see what they say. And they all have the same compelling message. We're in trouble, when you talk about, going to and watching, watching the news, watching the boob tube, as they say, right? Back in the old days. Well, now people go online and they do searches. They use their search engines. Well, guess what? Search engines are fallible, right? The first thing that's going to happen is these this information is going to pummel these particular SEOs and all that will just be all slanted, right? And so where factual information will appear, it's not factual, right? AI generated information will be thought of as factual because of the sheer volume that it comes out in, right? That whole overload, right, will basically, turn the tides on what you can believe and what you can't believe, right? And if we don't have any controls in place, if we don't follow the rules of what we did with journalism into the modern era, right, where we say there's fact checking, right, there's credibility, there's specific engineering around these how these AI engines work, that they don't have those controls in place. Chaos rules, right? And what we end up with chaos is we get all this basically a breakdown of society, even, a breakdown in understanding what is truth. You can't even, imagine what the trouble is if you're a teacher in grade school, right? And you're saying, you're talking about, well, this is what happened in the past. And you get challenged by a bunch of kids who go and surfing on their little tablets and say, this is what happened. That's not what happened. I just saw recently where they're stripping a bunch of data out of the archives, of the DoD archives. They're deleting data. Why are they doing that, right? Well, there's basically, you've heard the phrase, to the victor comes the truth. Right? So they are writing history. So they destroy whatever the information is that they deem as not relevant.
Well, rewriting history, right?
Yeah.
And then eventually these AI models are going to be changed, or they're going to be trained on this rewritten history, for example. And then, then you're going to have a whole generation that believes things that didn't actually happen, or they're not aware of things that did happen, right? So how do we get ahead of this essentially, right? Like when we look at it, there's a lot of challenges there, and I don't think we're gonna. This idea of like AI slop is probably going to continue to proliferate. How do we? Is there any way to rein it in, or is there any way at least to, label it? For example, but again, are people even going to care if you label it, right? Are they going to pay attention to the label? Because it's, I've experienced this myself. Like I talked earlier about, some of my experience on social media. And by all means, I don't really spend much time there, but every now and again I get curious and kind of want to see what's going on. And you get into this, there's this phenomenon called doom scrolling, which I've caught myself slipping into every now and again. And they should call it slop scrolling now. Because you start to get into that rhythm of looking at these just very short videos that are whatever they are, whether they're, reality based or whether it's something AI generated or something that's been cobbled together or whatever it is. It's all engineered to make you continue to go to the next one and go to the next one. You're not really sitting and like absorbing and reading anything. You're just kind of like, and I noticed that, and I don't know where, maybe we should look up where the term doom scrolling came from, but what I noticed is that you start to feel your brain slip into this like Neanderthal mode or something, where sometimes I gotta like break myself out of it, where I gotta kind of go, oh, I'm just doom scrolling now. I'm just going like bloop, 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 slop, 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 and just like just one after the other, one after the other, right? And you just lose all sense of space and time. And so I think that's kind of like the danger of just feeding people this like kind of like drip, drip, drip of things, right? And because my favorite thing to do is to actually listen to a really long, in-depth podcast where people are having a really interesting conversation. They're making me think differently about something, or they're informing me on a subject, or they're, just having fun like we do sometimes, right? And it's a comedic relief type thing, but it's a long format. And it's interesting that we seem to have broken out into either really short, bite-sized pieces of content or really long pieces of content. It's like people are either watching 15-second or 5-second videos. People are either watching a succession of 3-second videos, or they're watching or listening to 3-hour, 4-hour podcasts. It's a really weird dichotomy, right? Of where are people where's the human brain at? There's a segment of the population that really enjoys this really long format content, and other people that just want to be fed the drip, drip, drip. And it's kind of the equivalent of if you watch a late night talk show interviewing like a movie star. They come out and they do a little chit chat for like a couple of minutes, and they cut the commercial and they come back and they chit chat a bit more. But then you can watch that same actor or musician or whoever it is on a 3-hour podcast, and it's a completely different experience, even though it's the same person. So like the late night interviews are sort of like slop, right? They don't get into any real substance. They don't really get any deep into any kind of topic. It's just kind of like a bit of comedy, a bit of like, oh, hey, promoting the movie and whatever. Whereas the long format content brings up something completely different in that person.
Well, I think he answered the question. I think your analogy answered the question. People are looking for the content. People are looking to see, well, who is this person really? Mm-hmm. Right? They want to know and understand the details behind things. Right? I hate sensationalism journalism. And what I say is, sensationalism is about, the hot story of today and no real, facts behind it. What really happened? Why did this happen? What was the root cause? What's going to happen next? How is this going to play out for the next, next few weeks, the next few months, next few years? Who knows, right? No, they don't talk about that. They just talk about the sensationalism, right? And they move on. That's slop, right? And that slop is now turned into AI slop, that clickbait noise, right? And as long as you get the click, right, you're ongoing. You're the winner, right? And this is where people have the ability to turn around and make a choice, right? There's lots of different news sources out there that are struggling to, really make an impact on truthful information, truthful journalism. I'll pick on ground news, right? That's a good example, right? They're trying to make a headway into actually providing truthful information, right? And they have a scientific formula, and they present all that information around right versus last and all that kind of thing, right? The idea being that they want to be more than slop, right? If you go on to Fox, it's slop, right? If you go on to CNN, a lot of that is slop, right? And
Yeah.
you think this whole, all these different news networks, they've turned into slop. So why is it surprising to see that move into the, the whole computing digital realm, right? And onto the internet? It's not at all. What's very dangerous about this is now we got the ability to generate even more, right? And just bury the truth, right? The AI just keeps chugging, you know? Well, it gets to the point where people will just, yeah, they struggle, right? They struggle to differentiate what the truth is and what fabrication is. And they don't know where credibility lies. They don't have no trust in the sources. Skepticism is the way to go, right? Being cynical is the normal answer to things. You cannot believe anything, right? And what happens, of course, is people retreat into their ideological echo chambers. They'll just, they'll go to where they believe sources that confirm their pre-existing biases, and it just continues on and on, right? So you asked, okay, what can you do about it, right? Well, we have to have the ability to expose and clearly delineate AI generated slop, right? And that has to, if AI generates it, it has to have a signature. And that signature cannot be played with, it cannot be manipulated. It has to be unique, right? Can we do that? Yes, right? Is it expensive? Yeah. Can it be done from a point of view of, you've got the generator and then you've got the reader and, the viewer. Can that viewer then look at that and then utilize that? Of course they can, right?
Can the reader discriminate?
Can your reader discriminate? Yeah. And of course, can those, and that's where we get into verification tools, right? So the idea is that, we talk about things like blockchain and all that. That can be the foundation level of a lot of this information, right? The other thing is, can we have trusted, verifiable fact checking, right? We talk about Snopes, for instance, Snopes.com. They'll go out and spend the money and the time and verify facts. Who is paying for them? Who, if you work for Snopes, where's your paycheck come from? Right.
But how do you verify it to begin with, right? Like, how do you, for example, if you have, fact checking or Snopes or what have you, how are they fact checking, right? If you don't have actual journalists that are out there, searching for the truth on the ground.
You just use AI and you just look for the, if you have something that's recurring enough times, it must be the truth.
Yeah, potentially, yeah. I mean, or at least, or a lie that's been told enough, right? Like it gets very murky, but I guess as well, like, how long before AI figures out how to remove the watermark that says it's AI? Like, I just saw that there was a new version of, I think it was Gemini, that has to do with image manipulation, and people quickly figured out that it could use it to remove the watermarks from Getty Images or any of these other sites and some people said, well, it didn't do the best job, but for most people, they couldn't really discern that it was maybe a little bit lower quality because it's figured out how to fill in where the watermark covers over, right? But that's been a recent sort of breakthrough, and I guess it kind of ties into this. Now you have all this content that has been generated by talented people and artists and what have you, and now AI can just run right over it. And yeah, you can put a watermark on an image, and AI's figured out how to remove that watermark now, right? So there doesn't seem to be any checks and balances. I mean, you could use blockchain to mark something and say it was original or it's not AI generated, and how long before the combination of AI and quantum computing obliterates the security of blockchain, right? So it's like when you look at it, the potential there of like there's lots of things we could do, but how long before our best efforts are thwarted at every corner by AI, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And the idea too is I'm glad you brought that one point up is that, what people are being able to discern, right? And there's a lot of people out there that do not understand that they're being conned, that this is a lie, that this is a fake, right? They just don't understand that this is the capability is there now to fake them, to con them, to basically lie to them, right? So it's very important for people to become literate, right? To be aware of what, and help have a healthy, critical respect to what they're looking at. And I don't think there's enough of that out there, right? So that's critical, I think. That's the other piece of the puzzle, is that people have to learn to say, not sure if I trust this, right? And they have to be very critical, right? Otherwise, they swallow it lock, stock, and barrel and run with it and repeat it, right? And they just become part of the slop, right? They're the slop givers, right? The slop repeaters, right? Yeah. And of course, the last but not least piece, of course, is we look to, our governments as a people. We look to our governments to provide regulation and controls, right? Constantly, we want to have those structures in place that we can trust. And that's what, if you put a whole bunch of people together and say we have a government that works with those people, right? The idea is that that's a trusted network, right? Now, far be it, we know that there's a lot of bad, examples out there today, right? But that in the truest essence, right? The idea is we need to trust, some kind of centralized group which we ordain the power to, be, the governors of, right? And ensure that what we digest as the truth is indeed the truth, right? And that's the idea of regulation, right? And I don't think it's a bad thing. I think regulation is necessary because I don't believe in parties or self-regulating, right? I believe that's a bunch of horseshit. I think you have to have third parties involved, right? Otherwise, you have, basically a conflict of interest.
So what you're saying is we can't use AI to do the regulation? Like we can use AI for everything else, right?
Why not? Yes.
That neutral body is probably going to be a farm of AI agents that are going to be the new fact checkers, right?
That's right. That's right. And they'll know everything because they're going on the clickbait and the repeating information. That must be true, right? That's the ultimate algorithm. Ultimately, what the big question is, are we reacting fast enough now, right? So tech is advancing right now at a pace that outstrips regulation. We know that now. And by the way, at least in the States, they've pulled all the regulation controls out and threw them on the floor and stepped on them, right? So they have no idea what the hell they're doing over there, right? So we're looking at, countermeasures that are not being implemented, right? We're looking at AI-generated noise that is growing incrementally, or more than incrementally,
exponentially.
And there's no stop to it, right? And it's going to become the dominant stream of source of information. And in the words of ChatGPT, the truth will be struggling for oxygen.
The sloppening is nigh. We're all gonna die.
Mental mouth scream in the dark of night. Digital claws grip my mind so tight. Algorithms thumping like a marching band. We're drowning in the noise of a silicon hand. The screens are alive, but humanity's crushed. Binary dreams turning flesh into dust. The wires hum loud like a mockingbird's cry. The sloppening's here, kiss your sanity goodbye. The sloppening is night, chaos cracks the sky. AI's laughter echoes, watch the humans fly. Rust is the new gold, machines always lie. The noise is forever, we're all gonna die. We're all gonna die. Code is the king and our lives are the pawns. The airwaves are dirty like a broken down song. Fingers on keyboards, they laugh in our face while the noise gobbles up every last trace. No escape, no way to shut it down. The static rules like a cold metal crown. We dance to their beat, no chance to rebel. Welcome to the soundscape that looks like hell. The sloppening is night, chaos cracks the sky. AI's laughter echoes, watch the humans fly. Rust is the new gold, machines always lie. The noise is forever, we're all gonna die. The noise is forever, we're all gonna die.
Sweet.
We're all gonna die. Oh yeah, that song was amazing.
That was a cool song. I like to listen to that multiple times. Yeah.
The noise is forever. We're all gonna die.
We're all
And then the other
gonna
line was, "The sloppening's here. Kiss your sanity goodbye."
Oh, that is so good. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.